A poor woman begs on the street with twin babies in her arms. When a young billionaire walks by, she says, crying, "You're their father, and you don't even know it." The moment he sees her, he realizes she's his ex-wife and is shocked. Jack Miller checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The meeting was dragging on longer than necessary, and he hated that. Wasted time was wasted money. His fingers drummed on the mahogany table, while the CFO prolonged the presentation with figures Jack had already memorized the previous night. "We can stop here," he interrupted, standing up abruptly. "Review the third-quarter projections and email them to me." It wasn't a request. The room emptied in seconds. Nobody questioned Jack Miller when he ended a meeting. His reputation in Manhattan's real estate market was not that of someone who wasted time on unnecessary pleasantries. In the penthouse of the corporate building, his assistant, Claire, waited with the revised schedule. Horizon Properties Board cancelled at 3. "I suggest we use the time to review the contract for the South Tower." Jack nodded, grabbing his coat. "I'm having lunch out. Keep postponing Preston until Monday. He can wait." Autumn painted the streets in shades of amber and red, but Jack barely noticed the season's beauty. His mind was calculating the next move, the next acquisition, the next contract. It had been that way since the divorce 3 years ago. Work was predictable, controllable, safe. The sidewalk on Fifth Avenue was busy, as usual. Jack walked with purposeful strides, automatically weaving around tourists who stopped for photos. That's when something or someone bumped into his leg. "Sophie, wait!" a female voice shouted. Jack looked down and saw a small girl with curly brown hair clinging to his pants. There was something familiar in those eyes, something that made his heart skip a beat. "I'm sorry, sir." She slipped out of my hand. The woman approached, panting, carrying another child in her arms. Time seemed to freeze. Jack felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. "Emily!" She looked up, and recognition turned her tired face into a mask of shock. "Jack!" It wasn't a question, it was almost an accusation. 3 years vanished like smoke. There stood Emily Carter, his ex-wife, thinner, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, yet the same green eyes that had once made him believe in second chances. "I wasn't expecting to see you," he said, realizing instantly how hollow his words sounded. Emily pulled the little girl closer to her. The child in her arms started to whimper. "Grace is hungry. We need to go," she mumbled, trying to hold the other child's hand while juggling the one she was carrying. Jack watched, confused. The girls must have been, 2 years old? Younger? The math started to form in his mind, a disturbing equation. "Are they—" he began, unable to finish the question. Emily stared at him, and in that look were years of pent-up pain. "You're their father, and you don't even know it." The words hit him like a punch. Jack felt the air leave his lungs. The world around them kept moving, people passing, cars honking, but he was stuck in that moment, unable to process what he had just heard. "How is that?" The words died in his throat. "Not the time or place," Emily replied in a low voice, adjusting the worn bag on her shoulder. There was a broken dignity in her that Jack had never seen before. "Sophie, Grace," Jack repeated their names, trying to grasp reality. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" A shadow crossed Emily's face. "I tried. Many times." The little girl on the sidewalk, Sophie, raised her arms to her mother, showing signs of tiredness. Emily tried to pick her up as well, but with Grace already in her arms, the effort was obvious. "Let me," Jack held out his arms to help. "That's not necessary," Emily stepped back. "We're managing fine." A lie. Even with his usual emotional detachment, Jack could see the exhaustion in Emily's slumped shoulders, in the worn-out clothes on the children, in the patched bag, in the scuffed shoes. "Emily, wait. We can talk. I need to understand." "Not now, Jack. The girls are hungry. They haven't eaten since last night." The information hit him again. His daughters were hungry. "Let me help. At least with that. There's a restaurant nearby." Emily shook her head. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity. It's responsibility." The words escaped before he could hold them back. A dangerous spark flickered in her eyes. "Responsibility now, 3 years later?" Sophie began to cry, alarmed by her mother's tone. Grace joined her sister, turning the tense encounter into an even more complicated situation. Jack noticed people watching. Emily tried to calm the children, but she was visibly on edge. "Please," he said softly. "Just a meal. For them." For a moment, it seemed Emily would relent. Her tired gaze flicked over her hungry daughters, but then she straightened her shoulders. "Thank you, but no. You made your choice a long time ago, Jack." She turned and began to walk away, slightly staggering under the weight of the two children. Jack stood there, watching his ex-wife and his daughters he hadn't even known existed, disappear into the New York crowd. The man who controlled multi-million-dollar enterprises, who ran meetings with the coldness of a general, was paralyzed. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Probably Claire, with some corporate emergency that suddenly felt utterly insignificant. Jack didn't answer. For the first time in years, the numbers, contracts, and deals didn't matter. Sophie and Grace, he repeated softly, feeling the weight of those names. With determined steps, he followed in the direction Emily had taken. He didn't know what he would say or do, but he knew he couldn't just go back to his office and pretend that meeting hadn't happened. Those girls were part of him, and he hadn't even known. Jack couldn't sleep. The night passed like a slow-motion film, each minute crawling by as he stared at the ceiling of his penthouse apartment. The whiskey that usually helped him unwind after a day of negotiations remained untouched. Sophie and Grace, his daughters. The reality hadn't fully sunk in yet. How could it? One minute he was a divorced man solely devoted to work, and the next he discovered he was the father of two little girls. He stared at his phone screen for the 1,000th time. The address he had managed to extract from Emily on the sidewalk before she disappeared into the crowd burned into his memory. An address in Queens, far from the opulence of his world in Manhattan. He got up before dawn, ignored the dozens of unread emails, the phone that rang insistently with Claire's name blinking on the screen. None of it mattered now. The coffee he usually drank in an elegant porcelain cup was replaced by a paper cup from a random coffee shop. Jack barely tasted it. His mind was fixed on one destination. The old building contrasted with everything he knew. Peeling paint, a rusty fire escape, a front door that didn't close properly. At least 3 building code violations he could immediately identify. He hesitated before ringing the doorbell of apartment 3B. It wasn't even 8 a.m. Maybe it was too early, but before he could decide, the door opened. Emily appeared, wearing the same clothes as the day before, and as if she also hadn't slept. "You came," she said, no surprise in her voice, as if she already knew he would show up. "May I come in?" Emily looked over her shoulder into the small apartment, then back at him. "The girls are still asleep," Jack nodded. "I just want to talk." "I promise not to wake them." A moment's hesitation, then Emily stepped aside. The interior was even smaller than Jack had imagined. One room that served as both living room and kitchen, and a single door he assumed led to a bedroom. Everything was meticulously organized, in stark contrast to the building's decay. There was no couch, just a small table with 2 plastic chairs. Emily pointed to one while she sat on the other. "You shouldn't have come," she said in a low voice. "How could I not come?" "It worked for 3 years." The unspoken accusation lingered between them. Jack studied Emily's face, noticing the tired lines that hadn't been there when they separated. "I didn't know, Emily." "You have to believe that." She studied his face for a long moment, as if looking for signs of deceit. "Part of me always knew you hadn't received my messages," she finally admitted. "But another part needed to believe you had chosen to ignore us." "Why?" "Because anger was easier to handle than disappointment." Jack absorbed those words. He had never been good at emotional conversations, at vulnerability. It was one of the reasons that led to their divorce. "What happened after we separated?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Emily sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the divorce papers were signed. I tried to contact you. I called your office, sent emails, even went there in person. Claire," the name hung between them like an accusation, "she always said you were busy, unavailable. Then that you had explicitly requested not to be disturbed with divorce-related matters. Jack closed his eyes, feeling a wave of anger. Claire, his trusted assistant, the woman who organized every aspect of his professional life. How many other things had she hidden from him? "I'll deal with her," he promised. A soft crying sound came from the adjacent bedroom. Emily stood up immediately, but before she reached the door, the whimper turned into two cries, louder, more urgent. "They always wake up like this," she explained with a hint of a smile. "One starts, the other follows." Jack stood, uncertain what to do. "Can I help with anything?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Could you warm some milk? It's in the fridge." While Emily disappeared into the bedroom, Jack examined the tiny kitchen. The nearly empty refrigerator held just the basics: a bit of milk, a few vegetables, leftovers from a meal. The cupboard was also sparse: a box of cereal, a few cans. He warmed the milk as best he could, finding 2 mugs. When Emily returned, she carried both girls, one in each arm. They were both crying, their little faces red and wet with tears. "They have fevers," Emily explained, placing them on the single bed Jack could see now through the open door. "It happens sometimes when things aren't good." Jack approached with the mugs of milk, finally seeing the girls clearly in daylight. Sophie, the one who bumped into him the day before, had a bruise on her arm. Grace looked even smaller. Her lighter hair stuck to her forehead with sweat. "How long have you been like this?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Emily took one of the mugs, testing the temperature before offering it to Grace. "Like what?" "In these conditions," she shrugged, a gesture meant to minimize the gravity of the situation. "We've moved a lot. This place is temporary. The landlord raised the rent at the last one." Sophie began crying harder. Emily seemed torn between calming both children at once. "Here," Jack offered, making a sudden decision. "Let me try with her." He expected resistance, but Emily just nodded, exhausted. Jack picked Sophie up, feeling the heat of the fever through her thin pajamas. The girl looked at him suspiciously, but accepted the mug he offered. For a few minutes, the small apartment fell quiet, except for the sound of the girls drinking. Jack observed the single room the three shared: a mattress on the floor, a small open suitcase with clothes, a few worn-out toys. "You don't deserve this," he finally said, keeping his voice low so as not to scare the children. "And they deserve it even less." Emily didn't respond, simply continued rocking Grace. "Please," Jack continued, "accept my help for the children." He saw the conflict in her eyes, pride struggling against the practical need to care for the kids. "I don't want your pity, Jack. It's not pity, it's responsibility. I want to do what's right." Sophie, in his arms, began to calm down, her eyes heavy with sleep after the milk. Grace had already fallen asleep in Emily's arms. "We can't go on like this," Emily finally admitted, her voice breaking. "I lost my job last week. The rent is due in 3 days. I was going to have to call my parents." The confession seemed to cost her all her pride. Jack knew how much that meant. Emily's parents were difficult, controlling people. It was one of the things that brought them together initially, both running away from complicated families. "I have a flat," Jack said, "on Park Avenue, 3 bedrooms, secure building. You can stay there while we figure things out." Emily shook her head. "I can't just move into one of your places. It's not mine. It's usually rented to foreign clients, but it's empty now. Nobody will bother you, and it's temporary until we find a better solution." Sophie stirred in his arms, murmuring something in her sleep. Jack felt a wave of protectiveness he had never experienced before. "The girls need stability, Emily. A safe place, proper food, a doctor to check on this fever." Emily glanced at her daughters, then at the miserable apartment around them. Jack could see her inner battle, the pride that shielded her versus the practical need to care for the children. "It's just a place to stay," he insisted gently. "No strings attached. When you want to leave, you can. I promise." Silence stretched. Jack waited, patient as he had never been in business. Finally, Emily nodded once, so slightly he almost missed it. "Just until we find something else, and I'll pay rent." "There's no need." "I'll pay rent," she repeated firmly. I'm not your charity case. Jack recognized the determination in her eyes. This was the same Emily he'd known years ago. Stubborn, proud, independent. The same woman who had challenged him when everyone else just agreed. As you wish, he agreed, knowing that was a battle for another moment. In less than an hour, Emily's and the children's few possessions were packed into 2 battered suitcases. Jack called a car, ignoring the wary look from the driver when he saw both the starting point and the destination. The flat on Park Avenue was exactly as Jack had described, spacious, elegant, impersonal. The kind of place he kept for important clients or occasions when he needed to work late and didn't want to go home. Emily paused at the entrance, holding Grace while Sophie hid behind her legs, wide-eyed. "It's big," was all she said. Jack observed the 3 of them, so obviously out of place in that luxurious environment. He felt a pang in his chest, realizing how he had moved on with his life, accumulating wealth and status, while Emily struggled to feed their daughters. "The bedrooms are over here," he said, carrying the suitcases. "There's food in the fridge, but I can order more groceries." Emily followed, still holding the children. "They've never been in a place like this." "They'll get used to it," Jack tried to reassure her. "Kids adapt quickly." The master bedroom was large, with a king-sized bed and an attached bathroom. Jack showed her the second bedroom, smaller but comfortable, with a single bed. "Maybe the girls can stay here, and you can take the master bedroom," he suggested. Emily shook her head. "They sleep with me. We've always slept together." Jack nodded, realizing how little he knew about his own daughters, their habits, likes, fears. "I'll let you settle in," he said, stepping back to the door. "You have my number, if you need anything." "Jack," Emily called when he was almost out. "Why are you doing this?" He paused, considering the question. The corporate answer would be responsibility. The legal answer would be obligation. But none of those felt right at that moment. "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply. Emily nodded, not smiling, but there was something in her eyes. A small concession, perhaps, a tiny acknowledgement. "We'll be fine here," she said. "For the girls, not for us." "I understand." Jack left the apartment feeling strangely out of place, as if he'd stepped into a parallel universe where nothing followed the rules he knew. Normally, he'd be in his office now, closing deals, signing contracts, building his empire. Instead, he was leaving behind his ex-wife and 2 daughters he didn't know, in an apartment not really his. The feeling was disorienting. On the drive back to the office, he ignored multiple calls from Claire. He had something more important to handle first: finding a doctor for the girls, ensuring proper groceries for the apartment, cancelling all future reservations for the flat. That evening, after a day in which he couldn't focus on any meeting, Jack returned to the apartment. He knocked softly, unsure if he'd be welcome. Emily opened the door, looking slightly less exhausted. "They're better," she said before he asked. "The fever's gone down." Jack nodded, relieved. "Can I see them?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Jack entered, noticing small changes. Toys scattered on the floor, a blanket on the sofa, signs of life in a place that had always been sterile. The girls were in the bedroom, sitting on the big bed, watching a cartoon on TV. When he walked in, they both looked up curiously. "Remember him?" Emily asked gently. "He's Jack. He's a friend of Mom's." Jack felt a pang in his chest. Not their father, just Jack, Mom's friend. But he understood Emily's caution. He couldn't simply show up in the girls' lives and claim a title he had never earned. "Hi," he said, feeling oddly shy. Sophie, the braver of the 2, waved back. Grace just watched him with eyes identical to his. "I brought something for you," Jack remembered, pulling out 2 small stuffed animals he'd bought on the way, a bunny and a bear. He offered them tentatively, like someone trying to gain the trust of wild animals. Sophie reached out first, taking the bunny. Grace looked at her mother, who gave a slight nod before accepting the bear. "What do you say?" Emily reminded them. "Thank you," they both mumbled in unison, their voices so identical that Jack could barely tell them apart. "You're welcome," he replied, feeling strangely moved by that simple exchange. He stayed only a few minutes. He didn't want to impose, not when everything was still so fragile. As he left, Emily walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, so the girls wouldn't hear. "For today, for the place. But understand one thing, Jack, I'm here for the girls, not for you, not for us." "I know." "Good. As long as that's clear." Jack nodded, respecting the boundaries she was setting. They were fair, after all. "Tomorrow I'll bring some medicine and more groceries." Emily didn't object, which he took as a small step forward. Later that night, in his own apartment, alone with a glass of whiskey he again couldn't bring himself to drink, Jack received a text message. They fell asleep hugging the stuffed animals. "Thank you." It was simple, almost impersonal, but it meant something. A small channel of communication had opened, a silent acknowledgement. From the adjacent room, down the hallway, Jack could almost imagine he heard the sound of children's laughter, an echo of what was happening miles away, where his daughters slept safe. For the first time in years, he felt that something good might grow again. He didn't know what. It wasn't naive enough to believe things would go back to how they were between him and Emily. But something was beginning, something neither of them fully understood yet. But that needed to happen, for Sophie and Grace. And maybe, in some way he couldn't imagine yet, for them too. Jack woke to his alarm at 5 in the morning. Normally, he'd be reviewing contracts or financial spreadsheets at this hour, but today he had a different plan. He spent a few minutes sitting on the edge of the bed, an odd feeling in his chest. It wasn't anxiety like before a big negotiation. It was something else, more primitive. Insecurity, maybe. The thought almost made him laugh. Jack Miller, insecure. The man who closed multi-million-dollar deals without batting an eye, now worried about a breakfast. But this was no ordinary breakfast. It was the first he would ever make for his daughters. The kitchen in his apartment was rarely used. Jack usually ate out or ordered in. Now, standing in front of the open fridge, he realized how little he knew about what small children ate for breakfast. After a quick online search, he made a list and ordered delivery. Fruit, bread, cereal, milk, juice, eggs. When the bags arrived, Jack meticulously laid out each item on the counter, as if preparing for an important presentation. He cut fruit into small pieces, prepared pancake batter, boiled eggs. He worked with the same focus he devoted to business, checking every detail twice. By 7 o'clock, Jack was parking outside the building with the flat. Carrying several bags and a thermal container, he straightened his tie out of habit in the elevator, then realized he was dressed far too formally for a casual breakfast. "Too late to change," Emily answered after the second knock. She was already dressed, but her face showed signs of a sleepless night. "You're punctual," she remarked, stepping aside for him to enter. "I brought breakfast," Jack announced, trying to sound casual, as though making meals for kids was something he did every day. Emily raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Jack noticed the girls at the living room table, still in pajamas, playing with the stuffed animals he'd brought. "Hi," Jack said, feeling suddenly awkward. Sophie, the more outgoing one, waved enthusiastically. Grace just observed him with eyes identical to his. "I brought pancakes," Jack continued, holding up the bags as proof. "And fruit. And, well, a little bit of everything, to be honest." "They don't usually eat much in the morning," Emily commented, but there was a slight softness in her voice. Jack nodded, heading to the small kitchen. With mechanical movements, he began taking containers out of the bags and arranging them on the counter. Emily watched him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Should I heat the pancakes?" he asked, pointing to the microwave. Emily nodded. "I'll set the table." Jack noticed she hadn't said "we've already eaten" or "that's not necessary." A small step forward. While Emily helped the girls wash their hands, Jack poured orange juice into colorful cups he had bought especially for the occasion. His hands, usually so steady while signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he held the child-sized cups. "Be careful with the—" Emily's warning came too late. Jack, lost in his own thoughts, bumped into the cup. Orange juice splashed onto the counter and dripped onto the floor. "Sorry," he muttered, feeling his face warm with embarrassment. Sophie, who was watching from the doorway, giggled. "It's okay," Emily said, grabbing a towel. "It happens." Jack took the towel, mopping up the mess, trying to maintain his composure. It was ridiculous to feel so out of place. He led meetings with the most powerful executives in New York, for heaven's sake. But here, he wasn't negotiating real estate ventures. He was trying to build something far more fragile, a connection with his daughters. The girls sat at the table, their curious eyes fixed on the pancakes and fruit. Jack served a bit of everything for each, unsure how much was appropriate. Emily didn't interfere. She just watched closely. "Do you like pancakes?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. "With honey," Sophie answered promptly. "We don't have honey," Emily explained. "I brought some," Jack said, pulling a small jar from the bag. "And maple syrup too. I wasn't sure which you preferred." Something flickered in Emily's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Jack opened the honey jar, but as he tried to serve it, the lid slipped from his hands, landing with a soft thud on the table. Sorry," he stammered, feeling increasingly inadequate. Sophie giggled again, amused by his clumsiness. This time, even Grace showed a slight smile. "Jack doesn't usually make breakfast," Emily told the girls in a half-conspiratorial tone. "He's learning." There was no malice in her voice, only a statement of fact. Jack felt a surge of gratitude that she hadn't exposed him as entirely inept in front of the kids. Finally seated, Jack watched the girls eat. Sophie tore into the pancakes enthusiastically, while Grace ate more slowly, methodically, cutting each piece with surprising care for someone so young. "Aren't you going to eat?" Emily asked. Jack realized he had just been watching his own plate untouched. "Oh, yes. Of course." He ate mechanically, more focused on the girls than on the taste of the food. It was fascinating to watch them. The small gestures, the expressions, the preferences. Sophie pushed the fruit aside, obviously more interested in the pancakes. Grace, on the other hand, methodically ate everything without showing a clear favorite. Jack poured milk for the girls, filling their cups. "They like their milk warmer," Emily said, noticing Sophie's grimace at the first sip. "Oh," Jack froze, holding the pitcher. "I didn't know." "You couldn't have known," Emily replied, with no accusation in her voice. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of those words. There were so many things he didn't know about his daughters, so many little details, preferences, habits. "I'll remember next time," he promised. The phrase hung in the air. Next time. A tacit acknowledgement that there would be other mornings like this, other breakfasts, other chances. Emily didn't respond, but Jack noticed she didn't deny the possibility. The rest of breakfast went on with sparse conversation. Jack tried asking the girls what they liked to play with, but his questions sounded too formal, as though he were interviewing a child for school. "Horses?" Sophie answered when he asked her favorite animal. "She loves horses," Emily explained. "Especially white ones." "Unicorns?" Sophie corrected with the seriousness only a child can have. Jack smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in many days. "And you, Grace?" he asked, turning to his quieter daughter. Grace looked at her mother, as if seeking permission to answer. "She likes cats," Emily answered for her. "And drawing." Jack absorbed that information like valuable data for a new project. In a way, it was exactly that, learning to know his daughters, piece by piece. When they finished eating, Jack started clearing the dishes. It was a simple, domestic gesture, something he rarely did. In his world, there was always someone else to clean up after him. "Do you have plans for today?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Emily hesitated. "I need to look for a job. I was thinking of leaving the girls with a neighbor in the building, but I'm not sure if—" "I can stay with them," Jack offered, the words out before he could think. Emily stared at him in surprise. "You have work," she reminded him. "I can rearrange my schedule." There was a moment of silence while Emily considered the offer. Jack sensed she was weighing pros and cons, the need to find a job versus the uncertainty of leaving the girls with a father they barely knew. "Maybe not all day," she finally said, "but a few hours." Jack nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. A few hours alone with the girls. What would he do? What would they talk about? But as he looked at Sophie smiling at him, and Grace watching him with cautious curiosity, Jack realized it didn't matter how clumsy he might be, or how many drinks he might spill. The important thing was to be there, to start building the bridge between his world and theirs, and maybe, with time and patience. Rebuild something with Emily as well. Not what they had before, that was in the past, but something new, based not only on who they were, but on who they could become now. Parents. A family. Somehow. The first breakfast. The first bridge. After 3 days of failed interviews, Emily returned to the flat exhausted. The job market had little room for a mother who'd spent 3 years solely caring for her daughters. Her once solid resume now had a gap that no one seemed willing to overlook. Jack was in the living room with the girls. Sophie was sprawled on the floor, completely focused on covering an entire sheet of paper with colorful scribbles. Grace quietly played with building blocks he'd brought the day before. "How did it go?" he asked, noticing the dark circles under Emily's eyes. She shook her head, dropping her bag onto the sofa. "Nothing yet." Jack watched as Sophie immediately abandoned her drawing to run over and hug Emily's legs. Grace, more restrained, just looked up and smiled shyly. "I have an idea," he said, as Emily sat down with Sophie now in her lap. "You can't spend all day looking for work and caring for the girls at the same time. It's too exhausting." Emily lifted her chin in that defensive posture Jack knew well. "We're getting by. I know, but it could be easier." Jack chose his words carefully. "What do you think about hiring a nanny? Someone to help while you look for a job." The suggestion hung in the air. Jack sensed he was treading on delicate ground. For Emily, accepting a nanny was admitting she needed help beyond the basics she'd already accepted, the roof over their heads. "I don't need—" "It's not for you," Jack gently interrupted. "It's for them, and also for me." Emily frowned, confused. "I can't be here every day," Jack explained. "I have the company, meetings, commitments I can't indefinitely postpone, but I also don't want to lose more time away from them." Something in Emily's gaze softened. For the first time since their reunion, Jack saw a glimpse of understanding. "I'll only accept if I can interview the candidate," she finally replied. "I have to trust whoever stays with them." Jack nodded, relieved. "Of course, your choice. I can get recommendations from the agency I use for corporate staffing. They're vetted, with references." Emily agreed with a brief nod. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was acceptance. For Jack, that was enough. In the following days, while Emily interviewed potential nannies and continued her job search, Jack reorganized his schedule. Important meetings were rescheduled. Video conferences replaced in-person sessions. For the first time in years, his priority wasn't work. 3 times a week, from 9 to 2, Jack took care of the girls. Initially, it was a disaster. He had no idea what order to do things. Snack first, then playtime. What kind of food to serve? How much TV was acceptable? "They like stories," Emily suggested before leaving for an interview. "There are some books in their backpack." Children's books. Jack hadn't read one since his own childhood. He sat awkwardly on the sofa, one girl on each side, and opened the first book he found. A tale about a lost rabbit in the forest. He began reading mechanically, like he was reading a financial report. But the girls looked bored. In desperation, he started improvising, changing his voice for each character, making exaggerated faces. Sophie laughed. Even Grace, always watchful, managed a small smile. Snacks were another challenge. Jack had no idea what was appropriate. On the first day, he offered chocolate, which Emily promptly vetoed upon returning. On the second, fruit and sandwiches, which went over much better. "Cut them into triangles," Emily advised, seeing his struggle. "They like them that way." Small tips, small routines. Jack absorbed them like valuable information, more precious than any market analysis. He learned Sophie was allergic to strawberries, that Grace needed her favorite blanket to nap, that both loved music, but only certain songs. Each little detail was a victory. Every smile, a bigger achievement than any million-dollar contract he'd ever closed. In the 3rd week, something changed. Jack arrived at the flat, and instead of the usual timid wave, Sophie ran over and hugged him spontaneously. She rushed up and clung to his legs, just as she clung to Emily so many times. "Jack, did you bring a story today?" The request caught him by surprise. Had he really created an expectation, a habit they anticipated? "I did," he replied, showing the new book he'd bought on the way. "And something to draw with, too." Grace, always more cautious, approached slowly. She didn't hug him, but stood by his side, looking curiously at the bag he carried. Jack felt something unfamiliar in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't business adrenaline or the satisfaction of professional success. It was deeper, more essential, as if an empty space inside him was finally starting to fill. That night, when Emily returned, again unsuccessful in her job search, Jack was sitting on the living room floor, both girls asleep beside him. They had spent the afternoon drawing, and colorful papers lay scattered around them. "They fell asleep here?" Emily asked, surprised. Jack nodded, an involuntary smile on his lips. "We were making up a story about magical horses and talking cats. I think it got too boring because both conked out." Emily observed the scene, her daughters comfortably asleep next to the man who, until weeks ago, had been practically a stranger. Jack noticed her expression, a mixture of surprise and something else he couldn't decipher. "Need help taking them to bed?" he offered. Emily shook her head. "No." "You've done enough today." She bent down to pick up Sophie, but before she could lift the child, the little girl mumbled in her sleep, "Daddy, horse story." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Jack felt the air leave his lungs. Emily remained still, her eyes fixed on the sleeping daughter. "She's dreaming," she said finally, her voice controlled. But there was no anger, only a statement of fact. Jack nodded, unable to speak. The emotion he'd felt earlier came rushing back like a powerful wave threatening to overwhelm him. Daddy. One word. A small victory. Emily carried the girls to the bedroom, while Jack gathered the scattered drawings. He found one by Grace, careful lines forming 3 stick figures. The largest appeared to have a tie. When Emily returned, Jack was already at the door, ready to leave. "They've gotten attached to you," she said, breaking the silence. There was no accusation in her voice, just an observation. "Is that bad?" Emily considered the question. Jack could see the thoughts passing through her eyes. Fear, caution, concern for the future. "No," she finally answered. "It's not bad. They deserve a father." She didn't say the word, but it hung in the air between them. "Tomorrow I'm bringing the resumes of 2 nannies," Jack said, changing to a more practical topic. "Both have great references." Emily nodded. "Thanks." It was a simple word, but loaded with meaning. Not just gratitude for the nanny resume, but for something bigger, for the effort, for being present, for the small routines that slowly built small victories. When Jack left, he took Grace's drawing with him. In the car, he looked again at the 3 stick figures. A family, perhaps. Not the one they had in the past, but something new. Something under construction, slow and fragile. Something that started with horse stories, sandwiches cut in triangles, and carefully kept drawings. Emily closed the door of the girls' bedroom gently. They had finally fallen asleep after a story and several lullabies. The flat was silent, except for the distant sound of Manhattan's traffic, 15 floors below. Jack remained on the living room couch, checking emails on his phone. It was almost a ritual now. He'd come for dinner, help with the girls, and when they fell asleep, he'd leave politely. A routine that respected the limits Emily had set, without ever questioning them. She watched him for a moment, noticing the small signs of change. His tie was loosened, his jacket tossed onto a chair instead of hung neatly, his hair slightly messy after Sophie insisted on playing beauty salon. "Would you like some tea?" Emily offered, surprising herself. Usually, this was the time she subtly indicated it was time for him to go. Jack looked up from his phone, equally surprised. "Sure." Emily went to the kitchen and put water on to boil. Her movements were mechanical as her mind raced. It had been almost 3 weeks since they'd moved into the flat. 3 weeks of a strange dance, Jack showing up regularly, bringing presents for the girls, helping with meals, telling stories, Emily looking for work, interviewing nannies, keeping the emotional distance she thought was necessary. But something was changing. She could feel it. She saw it in the girls' eyes when Jack arrived. She saw how he gradually relaxed in their presence. She saw it in herself. in how she no longer had to force cordiality. The kettle whistled, pulling her from her thoughts. Emily prepared 2 cups of tea and returned to the living room. Jack had put away his phone. He accepted the cup with a nod of thanks, creating a moment of shared silence that wasn't awkward, just expectant. "I found a job," Emily finally announced. Jack looked up, genuine interest on his face. "That's great. Where?" "At the public library. Nothing grand, just as an assistant, but it's a start." Jack nodded. "I'm happy for you." Emily looked at her cup, feeling the warmth through the porcelain. She remembered another conversation years ago when she talked about her dream of working with books. Jack had listened, but never truly heard, always too busy with the next meeting, the next contract. "That's why we got divorced, you know," she said suddenly, not lifting her gaze. Jack remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Not because of the work itself, not because of your ambition. It was because I was screaming on the inside, Jack, for years, and you never heard me." The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth they had never voiced during the marriage or the divorce. Emily went on, as if a dam had broken. "I tried everything. Conversations, letters, even actual screaming, but you were always somewhere else, physically present, mentally absent." Jack set his cup down, the movement careful and controlled. "I know," he said simply. There was no defense in his voice, just acceptance. "When I found out I was pregnant," Emily continued, "part of me was terrified. Not of the babies, as I found out later, but of what it would mean. Another thing for you to ignore. Another part of me screaming without being heard." Jack nodded, absorbing each word as a necessary truth, however painful. "So when I couldn't reach you after the divorce, it felt almost like a confirmation of what I already knew." "I'm so sorry," Jack said. Simple words, but loaded with genuine regret. Emily finally lifted her eyes, meeting his. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because the girls deserve more. They deserve a father who listens. Who really listens." Jack held her gaze without looking away. "That's what I'm trying to be now." "I know," Emily admitted. "I see how you look at them, how you pay attention to every detail. It's different." A silence fell, not uncomfortable, but reflective. Jack took a sip of tea, then said, "When I saw you on that sidewalk with the girls, it was like my entire world stopped. I realized I'd built an entire life around things that don't really matter." Emily listened, truly listened, recognizing the vulnerability in his confession. "I was a terrible husband," Jack continued. "I was so busy building a future that I lost the present, and then I lost everything." "Not everything," Emily said gently, gesturing toward the bedroom where the girls slept. Jack smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "No, not everything." They fell silent again, both contemplating the past they shared and the uncertain future before them. "I'm not asking for us to get back together," Jack clarified. "I know what we had is over, but I want you to know that this time, I'm here. Really here. Not just for them, but also and for you if you need me." Emily studied his face, looking for traces of the old Jack, the man who made promises he never intended to keep, who said whatever was necessary to end a situation quickly. But what she saw was different, a sincerity that had never been there before. "I don't know what here means," she replied honestly. "I don't know what we are now or what we might become." "I don't either," Jack admitted. "But I do know I want to be part of their lives, and I respect you more than ever." Emily nodded, accepting that simple truth. It wasn't a reconciliation, not a new romantic beginning. It was something else, something for which they didn't have a name yet. "The nanny starts on Monday," she said, shifting to practical ground. "Heather seems good. The girls liked her." Jack recognized the change of subject as a sign that the deep conversation had ended. For now, some wounds had been exposed, others remained untouched. They wouldn't solve everything in one night. "What time do you start at the library?" he asked. 9. "I finish at 3 is at least for now." Jack smiled. "They'll love it. Sophie already talks about making friends." "She's always been social," Emily noted, a small smile on her lips. It was a simple observation, but a meaningful one. A shared memory, a mutual knowledge about their daughters, something that connected them, regardless of the past. They finished their tea talking about practical things, schedules, the girls' routine, weekend plans. When Jack finally stood to leave, there was a new understanding between them. They hadn't resolved everything, far from it. But at least now they knew they were in the same place. Not in the past, with its hurts and mistakes. Not in the future, with its uncertainties and promises. They were in the present, imperfect, complicated, real. And for now, that was enough. It was the phone that woke him at 2 in the morning. Jack groped for it on the bedside table, still half asleep, his mind trying to process who would be calling at that hour. "Hello?" he mumbled, voice rough with sleep. "Jack!" Emily's voice was tense and unlike anything he'd heard before. "It's Grace. She's burning up with fever." Jack sat up in bed immediately, sleep vanishing like morning fog. "How high?" 103, 39.5. It's not going down with the medicine." He was already grabbing keys, phone, slipping on his shoes. "I'm on my way." "Did you call a doctor?" "I called emergency services, but they said the wait time is 2 hours. Don't wait. I'll take you to the ER right now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Jack drove like never before. New York in the wee hours was different. Empty streets that were usually gridlocked. Red lights he rolled through carefully if there was no danger. When he arrived at the building, Emily was already in the lobby, holding Grace wrapped in a blanket. Sophie stood beside her, in pajamas, hair tousled, face sleepy and scared. "Is Sophie coming with us?" Jack asked, gently taking Grace from Emily's arms. "I had no one to leave her with." "The nanny only starts on Monday." Grace felt too hot, her eyes glazed, breathing rapid. Jack felt a wave of panic unlike anything he'd known before. It wasn't the measured panic of high-stakes negotiations. It was raw, primitive fear, a father's fear for his child. "Let's go," he said, adjusting Grace in his arms. "I know a private hospital nearby. We'll be there in 5 minutes." In the car, Emily sat in the back with Grace, and while Sophie was in the front seat, securely strapped in. The little girl looked at Jack with wide, worried eyes. "Will Grace get better?" she asked in a small voice. Jack swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "She will, sweetheart. We'll take her to the doctor, and he'll take care of her." At the hospital, Jack's name opened doors that would normally be closed for a typical emergency. Within minutes, they were in a private room, a pediatrician examining Grace. "Pneumonia," the doctor diagnosed after listening to the little girl's lungs. "We caught it early, but she needs observation overnight. She can probably go home tomorrow with antibiotics." Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Jack stood next to her, a hand lightly resting on her shoulder. She didn't pull away from his touch. "I can stay with her," Emily said, glancing at Sophie, who had fallen asleep in an armchair in the corner. "But Sophie—" "I'll stay with both," Jack interrupted. "You need rest too." Emily hesitated, but the exhaustion of recent days seemed to finally weigh on her shoulders. "Are you sure? You have work tomorrow." "Nothing that can't wait." This was a change. The Jack of 3 years ago would never have said that. Nothing had been more important than work, deals, and deadlines. Now he didn't need to think twice. A nurse brought in a couch bed for the private room. Jack settled Sophie there while Emily sat in the chair next to Grace's bed. The girl was asleep now, the medication taking effect, fever gradually subsiding. "Why don't you get some rest?" Jack suggested, seeing Emily's eyes fighting to stay open. "I'll watch her." Emily shook her head, stubborn as always. "I'm fine." "Emily, please." There was something new in his tone, not an order, not a condescending suggestion, a genuine request from equal to equal. After a moment, she gave in. "Just for an hour." "Sure." Emily lay down beside Sophie on the couch bed, and within minutes she was asleep. Jack took the chair she'd left, watching Grace sleep. The IV in her tiny arm seemed too big, too invasive. The heart monitor beeped regularly, reassuring. "You'll be fine," he murmured, more to himself than to his sleeping daughter. The night dragged on. Jack stayed awake, dividing his attention between Grace in the hospital bed and Emily and Sophie on the couch. Every hour, a nurse came to check Grace's vitals, record data, adjust medication. At some point, Grace opened her eyes, disoriented. "Mommy?" she called weakly. "Mommy's sleeping a little," Jack answered, leaning over the bed. "But I'm here. Want some water?" The girl nodded. Jack helped her take a few sips through a straw, holding the cup carefully. "It hurts," Grace whimpered. "I know, sweetheart. The medicine will make the pain go away soon." Grace looked at him, truly looked, like she was seeing him for the first time. Despite her fever, her eyes were surprisingly clear. "Stay with me," she asked. Something inside Jack shattered. A wall, perhaps, a final barrier. "Always," he promised, voice thick with emotion. He adjusted the bed to its lowest position and, carefully avoiding the IV line, lay next to his daughter. Grace immediately snuggled against him, finding the warmth and comfort she needed. Jack wasn't sure when he fell asleep. He only realized he had when he awoke to a weight on his shoulders. He opened his eyes slowly, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then he remembered. Hospital. Grace. The little girl still slept in his arms, her breathing calmer now, her skin less hot to the touch. Someone had placed a blanket over them. Jack raised his eyes and saw Emily sitting in the chair beside the bed. She was quiet, watching them with an expression he couldn't decipher. It was no longer the defensive mask of the past weeks, nor the hurt look from their first meetings. It was something new, something he hadn't seen in years. "What time is it?" Jack asked softly, not wanting to wake Grace. "6 in the morning," Emily replied in the same quiet tone. "She's better. The fever's down to 100, 37.5 degrees. Jack nodded, relieved. He tried moving without disturbing Grace, but she clung to him even in her sleep. "I stayed with them while you slept," Emily said. "We sort of traded shifts without realizing." There was a gentle humor in her voice. Jack smiled. "I think she chose me as a pillow," he joked, indicating how Grace was curled against his chest. Emily didn't respond immediately. Her gaze shifted from Grace to Jack, then back to Grace. "She chose you as a father," she finally said. "It's different." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Jack swallowed hard, trying to contain the sudden rush of emotion. "I wasn't there when she was born," he said, voice low and gravelly. "I wasn't there for her first steps, her first words. But I swear, Emily, I'll be there for everything else." Emily nodded once, one firmly. She didn't speak, but Jack realized she didn't need to. Her act of covering them with the blanket, her choice to sit next to them instead of waking him, that said more than words could. Grace stirred, opening groggy eyes. She looked first at Jack, then saw her mother. "Mommy!" she called, reaching out her little hand. Emily moved closer instantly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Jack started to move aside to give them space, but Emily shook her head. "Stay!" she said simply. Then, without warning, Emily extended her arm, wrapping both Jack and Grace in a group hug. It was awkward, with the child in between them and the IV tubes in the way. But it was real. It was a hug that didn't ask permission, that didn't care about the past, about mistakes or hurts. The kind of hug that happens only when something stronger than pride takes over. Love for a daughter, gratitude for whoever protects that daughter, the realization that some things are bigger than old wounds. It wasn't complete forgiveness. This would take time, conversations, proof. But it was a beginning. The start of something that, in the early hours of the morning in a hospital room, finally felt possible. 2 weeks passed since that hospital night. Grace had fully recovered thanks to antibiotics and constant care. The incident had changed something between Jack and Emily. Not a complete reconciliation, but a silent truce, a mutual recognition. Jack continued visiting the flat daily, sometimes just for dinner. Other times he stayed longer, helping put the girls to bed. Emily no longer protested. The boundaries she had once drawn so firmly were beginning to soften. At the library, Emily finally had steady work. Nothing extraordinary, but it gave her a sense of purpose and, most importantly, independence. Heather, the nanny, took good care of the girls while she worked. Things seemed to be finding a rhythm at last. On a Friday, Jack showed up earlier than usual. The girls were still out at the park with Heather, and Emily had just arrived home from work. "I need to show you something," he said, skipping the usual casual cheek kiss. There was an undercurrent of excitement, almost a youthful nervousness about him. Emily looked at him, intrigued. "What is it?" "It's a surprise. Can we go now? Heather can watch the girls until we get back." She hesitated. Surprises weren't part of the unspoken arrangement they'd developed over the past weeks. But the look on Jack's face, a mix of enthusiasm and anxiety, was something new. Something she hadn't seen since their early months of dating, years ago. "All right," she finally agreed, "but let's not take too long." In the car, Jack remained strangely silent. He drove through a residential neighborhood Emily didn't recognize, far from the center of Manhattan, with houses instead of skyscrapers, trees lining the sidewalks. "Where are we?" she asked, when he finally parked in front of a two-story house with a small porch and a yard in front. Jack didn't answer. He got out and walked around and opened the door for her. Emily followed him, confused, until they reached the house's entrance. "What are we doing here, Jack?" He took a deep breath, then pulled something from his pocket. A key. Simple, shiny, new. "It's yours," he said, holding it out to Emily. "No rent, no deadline, just peace." Emily looked at the key, then at the house, then back to Jack. Understanding slowly dawned on her face. "You bought a house?" Jack nodded. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard out back, big enough for a swing set, close to good schools, and about 20 minutes from the library where you work. Emily stood still, words failing her completely. Jack continued, "The flat was never a permanent solution. You deserve a place to call home, a place that's really yours." "Jack, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he insisted gently. "This isn't a trap, Emily. I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness or force my presence on you. The deed is in your name, only yours. No strings attached." Emily shook her head, feeling unexpected tears forming in her eyes. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Jack said firmly. "It's the least I can do, and you know that." He opened the door and stepped aside, inviting her in first. Emily hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. The interior was spacious, filled with natural light from large windows. The walls were painted a soft beige. The hardwood floors gleamed new. There was no furniture yet, just space, possibilities. Emily walked slowly through the living room, then the kitchen. Her fingers traced the granite countertop, the white cabinets. "It's perfect," she admitted, almost against her will. Jack stayed by the entrance gate, giving her room to explore on her own. He wasn't trying to sell her on the idea. He wasn't pushing. He was simply waiting. Emily climbed the stairs. She found the master bedroom, large and bright. 2 smaller bedrooms, ideal for the girls. A bathroom with a bathtub, something the flat didn't have, and which the girls would love. When she came back downstairs, Jack was still in the same spot and patient. Something about his face reminded Emily of the man she'd fallen in love with years ago, before ambition consumed everything, before the distance, before the divorce. "I'll pay," she said, tears barely held in check. It was a statement of independence, a declaration that she wasn't surrendering. Jack stepped forward, not too close, still respectful of her space. "You already paid," he replied in a low voice. "With every step of courage, every sleepless night caring for them, every moment you had to be both mom and dad." The words hit Emily like waves, undermining her last defenses. A tear slid down her cheek. "Accept it," Jack continued gently, "for everything I put you through. And for the kids." Emily closed her eyes briefly, letting her pride, the shield she had worn for so long, finally yield a bit. "The girls will love the backyard," she whispered, voice trembling. Jack smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Sophie will want to swing, and Grace will probably spend hours drawing in that corner by the window." It was true. Emily could picture her daughters in that space, growing, playing, living, a place to call home. "When can we move in?" she asked, finally giving in to the idea. "Whenever you want. It's yours now." Emily looked at the key in her hand, small, simple, but carrying so much meaning. "Thank you," she finally said, the words insufficient to convey everything she felt. Jack nodded. There was no triumph in his face, no hint of superiority, just relief and perhaps a bit of hope. "Let's go get the girls," he suggested. "We can bring them to see it," Emily agreed, pulling herself together. "They're going to freak out." They left together, her house now. In the car, Emily remained silent, processing it all. It wasn't just a house Jack had given her. It was a statement, an apology, a promise. It wasn't perfect. There were still many unspoken conversations, many wounds not fully healed, but it was a real beginning. When they arrived at the flat to pick up the girls, Emily stopped Jack before he got out of the car. "This doesn't change everything," she said, wanting to be clear. "We still have a lot to work through." "I know," Jack answered simply, but Emily continued, "It's a good start." Jack smiled, the same smile that, years ago, made her believe he would be the father of her children. And now, finally, he was becoming exactly that. "A new start," he agreed. For a moment, they just looked at each other, not as ex-husband and ex-wife, not as adversaries, but as two people trying to rebuild something, not what they once had, but something new, something better. "Come on," Emily said finally. "There are two little girls upstairs who will want to know all about their new house." They went up together, side by side, not holding hands, not yet, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. The abyss that had separated them for 3 years no longer seemed so impassable. A house was more than walls and a roof. It was a symbol, a gift offered with love and respect, not control. And Emily, at last, was ready to accept it. The day began like any other in the new house. The autumn sun filtered through the freshly hung curtains, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. Emily woke before the alarm, a habit formed over years of struggling alone. For a moment, she lay there, absorbing the quiet, the solidity of the walls around her, the sense of safety that still felt strange. They had moved in only 2 weeks earlier. Boxes were still piled in some corners, but the girls' rooms were already set up, top priority. Jack had helped with the move, bringing new furniture Emily reluctantly accepted. "It's not for you," he had said. "It's so they have a proper start." And she hadn't been able to argue. Emily got up and checked on the girls. Both slept soundly. Sophie sprawled with one arm dangling off the bed. Grace curled into a tiny ball under the covers. Heather, the nanny, would arrive in an hour to watch them. Today was different. Today was the day of the final interview. After 2 rounds of selection, Emily had reached the decisive phase for a position at the Manhattan Public Library. It wasn't a high-level job, an assistant role, organizing books, helping visitors, but it represented something she had almost forgotten, her own identity beyond being a mother, beyond being an ex-wife. She chose her clothes carefully, a simple but elegant outfit purchased specifically for the occasion. Light makeup, hair pulled into a discreet bun. Professional but not intimidating. Approachable but not too casual. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection in the mirror, trying to believe her own words. The morning passed in a blur of nerves. She left the girls with Heather, took the subway and arrived at the library 20 minutes early. She sat on a bench outside, breathing deeply, visualizing answers to potential questions. The interview lasted exactly 45 minutes. Emily spoke about her literature background, interrupted when she married Jack. She spoke of her love for books, about believing libraries were communal spaces. She didn't mention nights awake with infant twins, temporary jobs or unpaid rent. Some stories don't belong in a job interview. "We'll call by the end of the day," said the library director, a middle-aged woman with tortoise-shell glasses and a kind smile. Emily left the building feeling light, regardless of the outcome. She had tried. She had presented herself not as a victim of circumstances, but as a professional. That was a victory in itself. Her phone rang halfway home, a number she didn't recognize. Emily stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, heart racing. "Emily Carter?" "Yes, this is she. This is Margaret from the public library. We'd like to offer you the position if you're still interested." The sidewalk seemed to wobble under her feet. "Yes, I'm very interested." "Great. Can you start on Monday? We have some paperwork and a badge to prepare." "Monday is perfect," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she expected. She hung up and stood there, letting the moment sink in. People hurried by, tourists studied maps, taxis honked. The normal rhythm of the city. But for Emily, the world had changed. She needed to tell someone. She almost called Jack out of habit, then paused. No, this was her achievement. He would find out soon enough. When she got home, the sun was already setting. Heather was in the kitchen, making pasta for the girls' dinner. Sophie was drawing at the table, tongue sticking out in concentration. Grace was sorting her building blocks by color on the living room rug. "Mommy!" Sophie shouted when she saw her, immediately abandoning her pencils to run to the door. Grace stood more slowly, but her eyes shone with the same enthusiasm. Both hugged Emily's legs, almost knocking her over. "Guess what, Mommy?" Sophie exclaimed, hopping in place. "Guess who came?" "Who came?" Emily asked, though she suspected the answer. "Jack," the two said in unison, pointing to the backyard door. Through the glass doors, Emily saw Jack adjusting a swing under the large oak tree. He was without his jacket, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, focused on the task. "He brought a swing," Grace explained solemnly, "a wooden one. And pizza," Sophie added, as if that were equally important. Emily smiled, silently thanking Heather with a look. The nanny nodded, understanding she was dismissed. "Girls, I have some news," Emily announced once Heather was gone. Both looked up, eyes bright, curiosity on their identical faces. "Mommy got a job at the big library, the one with all those books you like." For a moment, there was silence. Then Sophie burst into questions. "You'll work with books? You'll read stories? Can you bring books home?" Grace, quieter as always, simply smiled and took her mother's hand, giving it a proud little squeeze. The backyard door opened and Jack entered, wiping his hands on a rag. "I think the swing is ready for a test," he announced, then noticed the excitement in the room. "Did something happen?" "Mommy's going to work with books," Sophie answered before Emily could. "At the big library." Jack's face lit up with a genuine smile. "Is that true?" Emily nodded, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her accomplishment. "I start on Monday." "That's wonderful, Emily. Really wonderful." There was no surprise in his voice, just a calm certainty, like he'd never doubted she could do it. "I'm going to draw a picture," Sophie declared, running back to the table. "Mommy with books." "And a badge," Grace added softly. "Mommy's going to have a badge." Emily watched her daughters, feeling a rush of love so intense it nearly knocked her off balance. When she looked back at Jack, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. Admiration. "They're so proud of you," he commented. "It's just an assistant job," Emily replied, still uneasy with praise. "It's a start," Jack corrected gently. "A new start. Yours." "Mommy," Sophie called from the table. "Come see." They walked over together. Sophie had drawn Emily surrounded by books, a large, colorful badge pinned to her shirt. The books floated around like magic birds. "It's you at the library," Sophie explained the obvious. "It's beautiful, sweetie," Emily said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "You deserve all this," Jack said quietly, just for Emily to hear. "They're proud of you." He paused, then added, "And I am too." Emily didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. She just looked at him, really looked, letting her eyes convey what she wasn't ready to say aloud yet. A smile, not with her lips, but with her gaze. An acknowledgement of the road traveled, the battles fought. A silent thank you, not for the job, not for the house, but for something more fundamental. Respect. "Who wants to try the swing?" Jack asked, breaking the moment naturally. "Me!" the girls shouted in unison, racing to the backyard. Emily lingered a moment, carefully setting aside Sophie's drawing like a talisman. Then she followed them outside, where her daughters laughed and Jack alternately pushed them on the new swing. This moment was hers too, a step that was solely hers, yet somehow was also a step forward for all of them. A routine was forming. 3 days a week, while Emily worked at the library, Jack rearranged his schedule to stay with the girls. Heather, the nanny, handled the other 2 days. Weekends were flexible. Sometimes Jack appeared, sometimes he gave Emily and the girls space. On that rainy Thursday, Jack arrived earlier than usual. He carried a mysterious box and a soaking umbrella. "What's in there?" Sophie asked immediately, always curious, always direct. Jack smiled, pressing a finger to his lips in a secret gesture. "Materials for an adventure." Grace approached silently, her attentive eyes fixed on the box. Even after nearly 2 months of interaction, she was still more cautious, always observing before engaging. "What adventure?" Sophie insisted, hopping around him. "How about we build a magical kingdom?" Jack suggested, opening the box to reveal colorful poster board, rounded scissors, glue, markers, and small battery-operated LED lights. The girl's eyes widened at the possibilities. Within minutes, the kitchen table had transformed into an improvised art studio. Jack had only planned a few simple decorations, but soon found himself immersed in a whole narrative about dragon princesses who protected enchanted forests. "And they breathe colorful fire," Sophie added seriously. "Fire that doesn't burn, just makes plants grow." "And they talk to animals," Grace said, so into the story that she forgot her usual shyness. "All of them." Jack absorbed each detail, adding elements to the story, drawing very badly the characters they described. They weren't just sketches, it was an entire universe they were creating together. When they finished, the kingdom took over the entire living room. Cardboard castles, crepe paper trees, little lights representing stars and magical beings. A collaborative effort, messy and perfect. "Lunchtime," Jack announced, noticing it was already past noon. In the kitchen, he tried making something special: star-shaped sandwiches, juice in colorful cups, fruit carved like flowers. The result was far less elegant than he'd envisioned. The sandwiches looked more like smudges than stars, and the fruit resembled unrecognizable shapes. "Is this a flower?" Sophie asked, pointing to what was supposed to be a melon flower. "It's a magic flower," Jack improvised, "a very rare one." Grace eyed her plate, then Jack, and smiled. "Okay, it looks nice," she said with a maturity beyond her years. Like she was trying to reassure him, Jack felt a warmth in his chest. It wasn't pity in Grace's eyes, it was understanding. As if she knew the important thing wasn't a perfect lunch, but the effort behind it. They ate together, chatting about the magical kingdom, adding new elements to the story. Jack listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail of his daughter's personalities. Sophie, exuberant and creative; Grace, observant and deep. After lunch, they built a blanket fort in the living room, in the middle of the magical kingdom. Jack told stories, improvising adventures about the dragon princesses and their forest friends. The girls corrected him, added details, laughed at his funny voices. In the middle of one particularly elaborate tale, Sophie turned to him with sleepy eyes, the excitement of the day finally catching up with her. "This is the best story ever, Daddy," she murmured, snuggling against his shoulder. The world seemed to freeze. Jack felt the air leave his lungs. Daddy. The word hadn't been spoken before, at least not awake, not intentionally. His eyes met Grace's, who was watching quietly as usual. He worried she might feel pressured by the term Daddy, that it would create distance, but she just inched closer, leaning against his other arm. "Tell more, Daddy," she whispered, almost testing out the word as if it were a new taste. Jack felt a tightness in his throat, a surge of emotion so strong he couldn't continue the story for a moment. He took a deep breath, blinked away the moisture in his eyes, and went on about the dragon princesses. When Emily arrived home from work, she found the three of them asleep in the blanket fort, surrounded by the magical kingdom of paper and LED lights. Jack in the middle, one girl curled on each side, their breathing synchronized, as if they were parts of a single entity. She stood silently for a moment, noticing the remains of the artistic lunch in the kitchen, the scattered art materials, the obvious happy chaos that had taken over the house. Jack opened his eyes, sensing her presence. Carefully, not to wake the girls, he disentangled himself and crawled out of the fort. "They called me Daddy," he said softly when he reached Emily, the emotion still clear on his face. Both of them. Emily nodded. There was no surprise in her eyes, just calm acceptance, as if she'd witnessed something inevitable. "You're starting to earn that name," she replied simply. The words hit Jack hard. It wasn't just recognition, it was absolution, a seal of progress on a journey he hadn't known how to start just months ago. "I won't fail them, Emily," he promised, voice steady despite the emotion. "Not again." Emily studied him for a long moment, as though searching his face and his eyes. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. She said nothing more, she didn't have to. The commitment was there, born not of words or grand gestures, but of daily actions, of invented stories, messy lunches, and honest hugs, born of consistent decisions that formed a tangible pattern of reliability. Jack watched Emily step over to the fort to check on the girls. He felt the weight of the title he had just received, not just father in the biological sense, but daddy, with all the emotional meaning that word carried. It was a beginning, an unwritten contract, sealed by a child's word and an adult's recognition. A commitment that at last made sense. The porch of the new house had become Emily's favorite spot on mild autumn nights. A rocking chair, a cup of tea, the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. This was all she needed after a day at the library and hours playing with the girls. Jack had become a constant presence, almost daily, not imposed, not intrusive, just present. Tonight, he had stayed for dinner again. The girls loved when he cooked, even if the results were debatable. What mattered was the laughter, the shared mess, the sense of normalcy that was slowly taking hold. Now the girls were asleep, worn out after a bedtime story session. Emily had listened to Jack mimic pirate and princess voices, making the girls laugh until they were breathless. This was different from the Jack she had known during their marriage, a man always in a hurry, always mentally elsewhere, always focused on the next meeting or deal. The porch door opened softly. Jack stepped out, carrying 2 cups of tea. He offered one to Emily and sat in the chair beside her. "They finally fell asleep," he commented with a slight smile. Sophie wanted just one more story, but her eyes were already closing. Emily nodded, accepting the cup. She's always been like that, fighting sleep as though she'd missed something amazing. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the calm of the night, the aroma of tea and each other's presence without the pressure to fill the space with conversation. But there was something in the air, an unasked question, a topic they'd postponed too long, now ripe for discussion. "Jack," Emily began at last, her voice calm, without accusation. "There's something we need to talk about." He turned to face her, attentive. Over the past months, he had learned to truly listen when Emily spoke. "About what happened after we separated," she continued. "About the girls." Jack nodded, giving her room to continue. "I tried, Jack," Emily said, looking at the teacup in her hands instead of him. "I called, I wrote, but Claire must have hidden everything." Jack stayed still, letting the weight of her words sink in. They had touched on this briefly before, but never with detail. "How many times?" he asked in a low, controlled voice. "A lot," Emily replied. "First I called your office. Claire always said you were in a meeting or traveling or just unavailable. After a while, she started saying you had specifically asked not to be disturbed with anything about our divorce." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the burden of that revelation. "When I found out I was pregnant," Emily continued, "I tried harder. I sent letters, emails. I even went personally to your office once, but they wouldn't let me up. Claire said you didn't want to see me." "That never happened," Jack muttered, a cold anger beginning to build inside him. "I never knew you tried." "I assume so," Emily said, with no bitterness, just stating a fact. "After the girls were born, I tried a few more times. Sent photos of them as newborns to your personal email. Nothing." "I never got anything," Jack confirmed, tension in his voice. "My emails. Claire had access. She said she was filtering out irrelevant messages." Emily shook her head slightly, a sad smile on her lips. "I always suspected she looked at you in a different way. I always thought she liked you." Jack looked up, surprised. "What?" "It was obvious. Jack. For any woman, at least. The way she moved around you, always found excuses to touch your arm or shoulder when you talked. The way she looked at me when I showed up at the office, as if I were an intruder. Jack took a deep breath, letting this new perspective settle. Claire, his assistant for almost 10 years. Efficient, dedicated, always available. Always creating a barrier between him and the rest of the world, claiming to protect his precious time. I should have realized, he finally said, guilt evident in his voice. On the day I saw you on the street with the girls, that was the first time I suspected Claire's involvement, but even then, I never imagined it could be so calculated. Emily didn't respond immediately. She looked up at the stars, breathing in the cool night air. Maybe she convinced herself she was doing what was best for you, Emily eventually said, that I would be a distraction, a complication for your career. Perhaps, in a twisted way, she really believed she was protecting you. Jack looked at Emily with silent admiration. Even after everything, she could still find empathy, even for someone who had done so much harm. That doesn't justify it, he said firmly. No, it doesn't, Emily agreed, but it helps to understand. Silence returned, heavier this time, loaded with the weight of these revelations. 3 years, Jack finally murmured, almost to himself. 3 years lost. Not entirely lost, Emily gently corrected, glancing toward the room where the girls slept. We're here now, they're here. Jack followed her gaze, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination grow within him. Emily, he began, then stopped to gather his thoughts. I failed. Not just you, but them. Even if I didn't know about them, I failed by creating a system where someone else could make those decisions for me. By isolating myself so much in work that it seemed acceptable, somehow. Emily watched him in silence, seeing real understanding on his face. What happened, she said at last. What matters is what we do now. Jack nodded, determination replacing his initial shock. I need to talk to Claire. Yes, Emily agreed. You do. After that, Jack continued, I want to do things right. For the girls. For you. Emily didn't ask what he meant by right. It wasn't time for that conversation yet, but something had shifted there on the porch, under the stars. A truth finally heard, a mutual understanding. They adore you, Emily said after a moment. You know that, right? Jack smiled, a genuine smile despite the emotional turmoil. I love every second with them. Even when Sophie spills juice on my suit, or Grace corrects me when I miss a part of her favorite story. Emily laughed softly, recognizing her daughter's behavior. They're part of both of us, you know. Sophie has your determination. Grace has your watchful eye. It's strange how genetics work. And they have your strength, Jack added. Your resilience. Those are qualities I deeply admire in you, Emily. I always have. The words hovered between them, too sincere to be brushed off, too intimate to ignore. Emily simply nodded, accepting the compliment without trying to diminish it. Another small step forward. It's getting late, she finally said, rising from the chair. Jack also rose, understanding the sign that the conversation was over for now. There was much to process, much to do. Confronting Claire would be only the start of a larger process of re-evaluation and rebuilding. As they walked back into the house, Jack knew nothing would be simple. But for the first time, he felt clarity. He knew he had failed, but he also knew he wanted to understand and fix it. Not just with words or grand gestures, but with daily actions proving he had truly changed. For the first time in years, Jack felt he was exactly where he needed to be, facing exactly what he needed to face. And, painful as it was, there was something liberating about that. Jack arrived at the office earlier than usual. He wanted a few moments alone to collect his thoughts before confronting Claire. After the conversation on the porch with Emily, he had spent a nearly sleepless night, rethinking the last 3 years, coincidences now revealed as manipulations, the filters that had removed Emily and his daughters from his life. The empty office felt solemn that morning. Jack walked the silent halls to his own office, sitting in his chair and looking toward the anteroom where Claire had worked for nearly a decade. The efficient, dedicated, indispensable Claire. On the dot, she arrived at 8. Jack watched her through the slightly open door. Perfectly styled hair, immaculate suit, professional smile, a mask he was only now beginning to see. "Good morning, Jack," she greeted, noticing the open door. "You're in early." "We need to talk," he replied, pointing to the chair across from his desk. "Now." Something in his tone made Claire's smile falter for an instant, but she quickly recovered. "Sure, is it about the 10 o'clock meeting?" "No." Jack waited until she was seated. "It's about Emily." The name hung between them, heavy with meaning. Claire blinked, but kept her expression neutral, years of practice in hiding emotions. "What about her?" "You intercepted her calls, her letters, her emails, for 3 years." It wasn't a question. Jack kept his gaze fixed on her, watching the micro-expressions flicker across her face. Surprise, tension, a momentary panic, then recalibration. "Am I mistaken?" he pressed when she didn't answer. Claire shifted in the chair, her fingers tightening on the purse in her lap. "I did what was best for you," she finally said. "Best for me," Jack echoed, keeping his voice controlled despite the anger bubbling beneath. "Hiding the fact that I had 2 daughters was best for me." Claire turned pale. "You know about the children?" "Yes, Claire. I know about Sophie and Grace. I ran into Emily almost 3 months ago by chance. On the street." Silence stretched between them. Claire seemed to be calculating her options, as she always did in a crisis. Jack could practically see her mind sorting through alternatives, crafting justifications. "You were devastated after the divorce," she said finally. "You were focused on rebuilding the company, on proving your worth. Emily would have been a distraction, a setback. That wasn't your decision to make. Someone had to protect your interests," Claire insisted, a desperate edge creeping into her voice. "You didn't see the bigger picture." "And you did?" Jack leaned forward. "The bigger picture that meant I'd never meet my daughters. That Emily would face pregnancy and those early years alone, struggling to survive." Claire looked away. "I didn't think it was that serious." "Lies," Jack retorted, his voice cutting like a blade. "Emily was clear, specific. You knew exactly what you were hiding." Silence returned, heavier than before. Claire suddenly seemed smaller, as if her mask of total competence had finally cracked. "Why?" Jack asked, voice gentler now. "The truth, Claire, after all this time, I at least deserve that." She raised her eyes, and Jack saw something he'd never noticed, raw vulnerability, almost painful to behold. "You needed to focus," she repeated her earlier argument, but her tone had changed. "She would have held you back." Claire paused, taking a deep breath. "And yes, I've always loved you, and you never saw me." The words hung between them like a long-contained confession. Jack felt their impact, not complete shock given his recent suspicions, but still jarring to hear it directly from her. 10 years, Jack," Claire continued, her professional mask entirely gone now. 10 years by your side, knowing your habits, your preferences, your ambitions. 10 years being exactly what you needed, when you needed it. And you never saw beyond the efficient assistant. Jack took in her confession silently. There was real pain there, but also an unsettling distortion, a justification for unforgivable actions. "You destroyed my chance to be a father," he finally said. Words heavy with the truth they now both faced, "and I let it happen." Claire didn't respond. There was nothing she could say. "You're fired, Claire." The words were not spoken in anger, but with a sad clarity and unshakable finality. "Jack, please," she tried one last time. "It was a lapse in judgment. We can fix this. I can fix this." He shook his head. "There's no fixing what's been lost. 3 years, Claire. First steps, first words. They don't come back." "I'm so sorry," she said, sounding genuinely remorseful. "I truly am. I thought I was protecting you." "You were protecting yourself," Jack corrected softly, "from losing your position, your control. You twisted everything to justify your actions." Claire lowered her head, accepting the truth of his words. "HR will process your departure," Jack went on. "There will be a proper severance, references if you need them. I'm not trying to destroy your future, Claire. I just can't have you in my life anymore." "I understand," she murmured, standing slowly. At the door, Claire turned back one last time. "Do they look like you, the girls?" The question caught Jack off guard. There was genuine, almost innocent curiosity there, clashing with the calculated manipulation she had orchestrated. "Sophie has my smile," he answered after a moment. "Grace has my eyes. Both have their mother's strength." Claire nodded, absorbing the image of children she would never meet. "Goodbye, Jack." "Goodbye, Claire." When the door closed, Jack remained still for a long moment. 10 years of professional partnership ended. A betrayal revealed and confronted. A chapter closed. He picked up his phone and, for the first time in his career, cancelled all his meetings for the day. There was something more important to do. "From now on, I choose my family," he murmured to himself as he grabbed his coat, consciously. And he left the office without looking back. Jack drove almost mechanically from the company to Emily's house. The streets of Manhattan blurred past, his thoughts more real than the world outside. The conversation with Claire still echoed in his mind, her justifications, her confession, the look of someone who had built an alternate reality where her actions seemed noble, necessary. When he arrived, he found the front door slightly ajar. Inside, he could hear childish laughter. Jack paused for a moment, letting that sound wash away the tension he'd been carrying since morning. "Jack," Emily's voice called from inside. "Is that you?" He stepped in, closing the door behind him. Emily was in the living room, folding small pieces of clothing. The girls were in the backyard, visible through the French doors. "I cancelled my meetings," Jack said, answering the question in her eyes. "We need to talk." Emily nodded, reading the gravity in his tone. "The girls are busy. We can go to the kitchen." In the kitchen, Jack sank into a chair. Emily stayed by the counter, giving him space but remaining present. "I spoke with Claire," he began. "How did it go?" Emily asked softly. Jack took a moment to gather his thoughts. "She admitted it, everything. She intercepted your calls, hid your letters, filtered your emails. For 3 years. Emily showed no surprise, just a calm acceptance, as if she were hearing confirmation of something she already knew. "Why?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "She said I needed to focus on the company, that you would be a distraction." Jack paused, then added, "And she admitted she always had feelings for me, that she was competing with you, in a way." Emily nodded slowly. "I knew, not how far she went, but about her feelings. It was obvious in how she looked at me, the way she talked about you. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "I did. Several times," Emily answered without accusation, just stating a fact. "You always brushed it off as me exaggerating. Said she was just efficient, dedicated." Jack closed his eyes, remembering it was true. Emily had brought it up more than once, but he had never taken her seriously. "I fired her," he said finally, "obviously." "That can't have been easy," Emily noted. 10 years together." Jack looked at her, once again struck by her capacity for empathy, even towards someone who had caused so much harm. "She destroyed our chance at being a family from the start. Hid my daughters from me. How can you not hate me for it, Emily, for being so blind?" Emily sat down at the table, finally facing him. "I tried to hate you at first," she admitted. "It was easier to believe you knew about the girls and just didn't care. Easier than admitting that maybe you really didn't know. Why? Because if you didn't know, it meant I spent 3 years alone unnecessarily, that all those sleepless nights, all those temporary jobs, all those run-down apartments." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It all could have been different." Jack felt the weight of those words, the weight of all the what-ifs that could never be answered. "But I realized something," Emily continued, "when I saw you with the girls, when I saw the man you're becoming now." "What?" "That maybe we needed those 3 years apart. I needed to find my own strength. And you needed to learn to really see what matters." Jack took in her words, feeling their truth resonate deeply. "I knew about Claire," Emily added softly, "but you needed to discover it for yourself." There was a wisdom in her words that touched Jack in a way he hadn't expected. Emily wasn't just forgiving him. She was acknowledging the value of the individual journeys they'd both taken. "I'm so sorry," Jack said, simple but laden with meaning. "For everything. For being blind, for being absent, for letting work overshadow us." Emily nodded, accepting his apology without diminishing it. "What happens now?" she asked after a moment. The question hung between them, an intersection, a moment of choice. "I don't want to fix the past anymore," Jack finally answered, choosing his words carefully. "I want to take care of what we have now." It wasn't a plea to resume their marriage, to pretend the intervening years never happened. It was a different proposition, to honor the present in all its complexity. "The girls need both of us," he went on. "In different ways, but complementary." "Yes," Emily agreed. "They do. And Jack hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "I need the three of you. I don't need us to go back to what we were. I just need to be here, for them, for you, if you'll let me." Emily didn't answer immediately. Her gaze shifted to the window, where the girls still played outside, unaware of the conversation shaping their future. Then, in a simple but deeply significant gesture, she reached across the table and took Jack's hand. She didn't speak. She didn't let go either. That was answer enough. For now. Talisaham by Autumn was moving along, bringing shorter days and cooler breezes. Golden leaves fell in the small backyard, creating a natural carpet that delighted the girls. Sophie ran in circles, making leaves swirl around her. Grace, more methodical, collected the prettiest ones to press between the pages of her favorite books. The routine in the house gradually found its groove. Jack started spending more nights there than at his own apartment. Not in Emily's room, he slept on the sofa or in the guest room when it was organized. They hadn't discussed it explicitly. It was a natural evolution, a new normal respecting both of their rhythms. At work, Jack had completely reorganized his structure. He delegated more responsibilities, cut back on hours, showed up primarily for truly important meetings, ignoring those that were just ego boosts. His temporary assistant, an older woman named Margaret, was efficient without being intrusive, professional without being possessive, a refreshing change. At home, and he'd started thinking of it as home, he found a new pace with the girls. Sophie now ran into his arms when he arrived. Grace, though more reserved, sought his attention in subtler ways, showing him her drawings, bringing him books to read together. On a Friday, Jack decided to make dinner. It wasn't his strong point. In fact, during their marriage, he had barely stepped into the kitchen except to grab something from the fridge. He remembered the countless times he'd come home late to find dinner waiting and Emily already asleep. How many silent meals, how many missed opportunities to connect. Now, however, he was determined to try. With sleeves rolled up and wearing a borrowed apron, he was attempting to decipher a spaghetti recipe that looked simple enough, at least in theory. The girls had settled on the kitchen floor, coloring with crayons while he cooked. Sophie narrated an elaborate story about astronaut princesses, which Grace illustrated with careful lines. "Daddy, that's burning," Sophie pointed out, sniffing the suspicious odor starting to fill the room. Jack rushed to the stove, where the sauce was boiling over. "Everything's under control," he lied, lowering the heat and trying to salvage what he could. Grace watched with keen eyes but said nothing. She just continued drawing, now depicting Jack in the kitchen, surrounded by clouds of smoke. The accuracy of her observation was impressive and slightly embarrassing. "I think we need more seasoning," Jack muttered to himself, examining a sauce that managed to be both scorched and bland. A culinary achievement. "Mommy puts green leaves," Grace offered, without lifting her eyes from her drawing. Green leaves, right. Jack scanned the counter, spotting a bunch of basil he'd bought earlier. "This should do." He added a generous handful to the pan, hoping to mask the burnt taste. Emily arrived just then, returning from the library. She stopped at the kitchen door, taking in the scene. Jack flustered amid pots. The girls spread out on the floor with their drawings, the table set somewhat haphazardly. "What's going on here?" she asked, a smile forming on her lips despite herself. "We're making dinner," Sophie announced, leaping up to hug her mother. "Daddy's burning the sauce," Grace added in her characteristic honesty. Jack turned around, a splotch of tomato sauce on his shirt, wearing an expression that was half embarrassed, half proud. "Welcome to chaos." Emily placed her bag on a chair and approached the stove. Jack stepped aside, letting her inspect the damage. She took a spoon, tasted the sauce, and made a face. "You're still a terrible cook," Jack chuckled, not offended. "But they love it," he said, nodding toward the girls watching with interest. Emily looked from the girls to Jack, then to the genuine effort she saw in the messy kitchen. "Maybe it's time to learn together," she suggested, grabbing another apron. There was something in those words that went beyond cooking, a broader invitation, a slightly open door. They worked side by side, Emily salvaging what she could of the sauce, Jack following her directions with a concentration he had never devoted to domestic tasks before. The girls kept drawing, occasionally asking to help and making an even bigger mess, yet a richer experience. Sophie insisted on adding more cheese than any pasta could possibly handle. Grace carefully cut basil leaves into perfectly symmetrical pieces. Jack watched her precision, amazed that such a small child could be so meticulous. "She gets that from you," Emily whispered, noticing his gaze. "From me. That attention to detail, that need to do things just right. You used to apply it to business, she applies it to everything." Jack processed this, seeing his daughter in a new light, recognizing a part of himself he'd never noticed in her before. When they finally sat down to eat, the result was far from perfect. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce too acidic, despite Emily's heroic attempts, but nobody seemed to care. "For a first family dinner, it's not that bad," Emily remarked, twirling spaghetti around her fork. Family. The word did not go unnoticed by any of them. Jack looked at her, then at the girls, feeling a wave of clarity he hadn't felt in years. "I failed you, Emily," he said quietly but firmly, "but I won't fail them." He paused, gathering courage. "And if you'll let me, I'll never fail you again either." It wasn't a marriage proposal, nor a grand romantic gesture. It was a simple, honest promise, born not of fairy tale illusions, but of hard-earned lessons. Emily didn't reply immediately. Her gaze drifted over each of them, Sophie with tomato sauce on her chin, Grace meticulously cutting her spaghetti, Jack waiting with a vulnerability the old Jack Miller would never have shown. Then she smiled, not just with her lips, but with her heart. A smile Jack recognized because he had learned to truly see. "More sauce out, please." Sophie broke the moment, her childish urgency intruding. And so dinner continued, filled with laughter over the partially burnt food, the girls' stories of their day, and weekend plans. Grace spilled juice on the new tablecloth. Sophie managed to get spaghetti in her hair. Jack told terrible jokes that somehow made everyone laugh. It wasn't perfection. It was better, real love, with all its imperfections, attempts, and small victories. A new family, built not on illusions or expectations, but on truth, on daily, conscious choices to show up, to truly see each other. Later that night, after the girls were in bed, Jack and Emily sat on the porch as they had many nights before. But something felt different. A new beginning lingered in the air between them, unspoken but palpable. "Do you think the girls are happy?" Jack asked, gazing up at the stars. "Can't you tell?" Emily answered. "They're blossoming. Sophie talks about you all the time. And Grace, she's never drawn as much as she does now." Jack nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the chance he'd been given. "What about you?" he asked, and turning to her. "Are you happy, Emily?" She weighed the question, giving it the importance it deserved. "I'm at peace," she finally replied, "more than I have been in a long time." "Peace is good," Jack agreed. "It's a start." "A start," Emily echoed, savoring the words. Their hands found each other in the space between the chairs. A simple gesture, a bridge, a choice. Beginning again did not mean going back to who they were. It meant building something new, where no one had to be perfect, just present, choosing to stay every day, not out of obligation, not by default, but for love. Real, imperfect, true. Under the stars, with no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, a family became whole. Not the family they might have been 3 years ago, but the family they needed to be now, stronger because of the journey, wiser because of the scars. A new family, built on truth, Sometimes, starting over isn't going back. It's creating something new, where no one has to be perfect, just present. Because love doesn't need promises. It needs people who choose to stay. Every single day. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.